Hello everyone and welcome to the Gunpla Network. I'm the Spicer and today we'll be looking at the figurized standard Lacus Clyne from Gundam Seed. Today's review wouldn't be possible without those fine folks over at Canadian Gundam. Canadian Gundam is your one-stop shop for all things Gunpla and Plamo here in North America. With a private warehouse, flat rate shipping in the US and Canada, and a vast catalog, they've got pretty much anything you'll need. When you're checking out that vast catalog, don't forget to use the promo code Gunpla Network to save yourself 10%. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty of this kit, I want to talk about two things that this kit is solidified for me. First, being the choice to start collecting prize figures, things of that nature. All peer pressure aside, kits and even action figures like this have really kind of come to hammer home the idea that I like figurines more. I've been an avid action figure collector pretty much my entire life, but as an adult, pretty much for the last 5 to 10 years, maybe slightly longer. And I've kind of gotten to the point where I don't really like how some of the joints look. Some look absolutely fine. This is probably one of the better examples of it, but just the way some of the joints look, it breaks the immersion, if you will, of having this character on your shelf. And I think the visual stylings of figurines just end up looking better. Now, I mean, figures, action figures, kits, they still look fine. It's just something I'm not into anymore. I prefer to have a static, better looking thing that I don't have to mess with. But that's my personal opinion. This kind of drove that home for me a little bit. Like I said, I'll talk about more why in a little bit. But the second thing is, Bandai really needs to expand some kind of line, whether it's Bam Presto or some other line, to include Gundam figures. I don't know why they haven't done this. Maybe it's a weird deal with Mega House, but I'm pretty sure Mega House is a Bandai brand, so a little weird, but maybe they're just keeping the cream of the crop for Mega House for more expensive figurines and kind of abandoning older, original Seed Destiny era prize figures altogether. I mean, we haven't seen newer prize figures pretty much since then. I don't think I've ever seen a reasonable size prize figure of anyone from 00 or Age or anything onward, so a little weird. The Mega House things look great, but they're really pricey, so a little strange. I would love for Bandai to do this, but if you want me to talk more at length about my thoughts and kind of how that would happen or what it would look like, let me know in the comments down below, because it's really not the conversation we're here to have today. It's kind of something I thought about while looking at this kit. Now on to the kit itself. Overall, it's relatively unimpressive in both a good and bad way. It's not offensive, it's not great, it's not terrible. It's kind of just there, it exists. There are some missed potential pieces here and there that we'll talk about in a little bit, mostly in the hair and dress, but that's kind of the biggest thing that stands out. Some of the stickers are a little rough, but meh. I'd honestly say, just as kind of a heads up, I'll talk about it more in the conclusion, but if you're a Seed fan, this is something that would be a nice addition if you want something a little different, but you don't want to shell out that extra money for the Mega House figures or do the hunting for some of the older prize figures. It's a good thing to exist. It serves its purpose. What you see on the box is effectively what you get, for better or for worse. And it's just there. It's something that's on my shelf, but it doesn't really stand out all that much. It's a nice little different thing to build in terms of experience, but it's really not all that spectacular either. If you want something, I would say, and I'm kind of surprised they haven't done this, figurized standard would probably be better served sticking to pilot figures or something that there's not a lot of extra stuff to that can limit articulation or kind of how it works, and Lacus kind of falls into that situation. That if you want something that's really Lacus and kind of flashy looking and embodies the character, this really isn't it. It serves a purpose, it's there, it's a placeholder, if you will, if you are a Lacus fan, but it's not really the ideal version of Lacus. Now, visually speaking, everything's actually pretty good. This is really the saving grace of this kit. Some of the joints do look a little odd in certain poses, but it's far better than a lot of action figures and model kits like the figurized standard line that are humanoid. have in the past. Like Gundams and stuff, it's mechanical, seeing some joints stick out, it's not a huge deal, but it's a little different when you see a weird shoulder joint and like this weird caved in portion of a chest to where it connects. It's just not ideal. It's something I've noticed in the past, may just be me though. Luckily, it's really not a big deal here. The way the clothing is designed hides a lot of that, so it works pretty well. The hair does have some hollow parts in a couple of the individual pieces, but it's really not a big deal. You really don't see it unless you take it off, so you don't have to worry about it. The pre-done face is screen accurate, and the dress is pretty much the same. The only real sticking point, I've had, speaking of sticking things, is the stickers. They're not terrible, but they're not great. Now, this could just be, as I've always said, my trash sticker fitting, but generally, the worst stickers are the two on the bottom. They're meant to curve around the side of the dress as kind of the trim piece, and they don't like to stick very well. Kind of take that as you will. If you're a lot better at sticker fitting, this may not be a problem for you, but it was for me. You can kind of see that in a couple of these shots. But one thing that unequivocally is probably a problem is the stomach sticker. Now, I will preface this and say it may be because I got the joint in the stomach upside down, but I still had the sticker kind of being crushed and rubbed up even after fixing the problem. So I don't know if I weakened it and it just kind of brushed up since it was already raised a little bit, or if it's just a problem on this kit. There's not a lot of clearance. The part on the plastic on the stomach is raised that the sticker goes on, so that's kind of something to maybe concern yourself with if you're really wanting to pose this around a lot. I can't imagine a lot of people will, but it is something to kind of think about at least. The two top stickers on the torso and the collar look just fine. They're a flat surface, so there's really not a lot of things for them to catch on or peel up from. I do want to make one point here, and this is probably due to kind of the figurine stuff. I do wish they would have done a different finish on the hair, which I know for the price point and the type of figure is a little crazy, but it got me to thinking I might try to do like a matte finish on the hair to differentiate it from the rest of the kit, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you think a matte finish, a semi-gloss, or like a really high gloss finish would work best for that hair? I'm generally curious because I'm not great at finishes most of the time, so let me know. Now, the build and articulation are a pretty different story. The build is okay, but since I don't have a lot of experience with the figure-rise standard line, I'm not 100% sure. I will say, though, it felt very similar, which would make sense, to the Gun Girl Lady kit I reviewed a while back, and slightly less so to the Kotobukiya Wonder Woman I had reviewed a little bit back. There are a couple of problem parts, I would say, on this, mostly coming in on the, I guess, bicep joint. It's really not a joint, it really just holds together with friction, and it's two pegs. A little bit weird. I think I vaguely remember the Gun Girl Lady kit being similar to that, but not the best. Moving the arms does kind of cause a problem there because it can pop out, so just be very careful when you do it. Not the end of the world. A little easy to get kind of wonky and pull out, but generally, if you're careful, it's not a terrible idea. I will say out of those three, the Wonder Waifu is probably the best, but Kotobukiya is, of course, a little bit pricier, so kind of keep that in mind. But this is still passable for its price point, very similar to the Gun Girl Lady kit. If you built any of those, you're in a very similar ballpark in terms of a build and articulation. Now, probably my biggest complaint, however, is the hair, and this is a complaint, unfortunately, that I share with the Figma Satsuki from Kill la Kill. One of my favorite figures in my collection for sure, because I love Satsuki. Satsuki-sama's the best, but the hair does not move even though it's on ball joints. Sure, it moves, it wiggles a little bit, but the joint is so far up in the head that the hair is supposed to cover it, which makes sense, you're trying to hide a joint, but it also limits the articulation to almost none at all. Makes a problem when you're trying to put the stand on. They like to pop off, they like to hit the shoulders, so you're not getting a big deal of side-to-side movement, which means you're really looking at Lacus pretty much front on, and that's most of what you're going to get unless you start taking those out. Now, the front little hair strands that come down from kind of like the front of the ears portion of the head are a little bit easier to move around. They do pull the top of the hair on the front off a little bit, so be careful when you're doing that. I've had mine pop off once, but you will see the gapping, so you'll know to kind of push it back down, and it doesn't move those side pieces too bad. Now, outside of this, my second real big complaint is the dress. It can be removed, which is nice, but it's plastic and there's no real posability to it. They did layer it, which is a cool concept, and if you're going with something static like this, it kind of makes sense. But I would have liked to have seen for this to be maybe a couple bucks more expensive. Throw in some cloth like you would have with the crossbone Gundams for their cape or their cloak, which I think is probably only in the real grade, so take with that as you will, and put a little wire in it. That would have been great. You could have got a lot more dynamic posability out of it, even with Lacus's limited head movement, and it would have been cool. This would have gotten a lot closer to the visual aesthetic that a lot of those flashier statues or figurines would have gotten to, and embodied more of the whole like pop idol aspect of Lacus, since this is the uniform or the costume or the clothes we see her in this phase of her life. So kind of would have been nice to match that up, but I'm not crazy. That would have made this more expensive, and Bandai I don't think has ever done that. So little crazy for me. It'd have been cool to expect, but I would love to see if anyone out there messes with like capes and wire, or in this instant dresses and wire, to do something like that. I think it would really make this kit just so much better. But that's a personal preference, and that's a lot of work, so I'll leave that to some customizer out there. If anyone does that, be sure to tag me somewhere, because I really want to see that. I think that would be really cool. Now, removing the dress itself is not too difficult, or at least the bottom portions of it. You do have to take the kit apart at the waist. Not too terrible. The joint's not super tight, nor is it super loose, so it, parts for me, but whatever, it's not terrible. I do think this version looks a lot better, but it also does show the huge gaps between the legs and the waist. The way the waist joint is designed is going to put those out a little bit. Even if you push them in, there's going to be a gap around the top. So it is something that's more noticeable, and I'm a little bit pickier about that, especially with like human figures like this. But, to each their own. Now, I will say this gives you a lot more leg articulation, obviously, because you can actually move the legs. There's a fair amount of room to do that now. You can get her in some crazy action poses if you want, even though that's not really her bag. But anything pretty much, since the skirt is so short, you're going to see those gaps in her pantsuit. So if you're concerned about that, maybe keep the dress on. Total preference. Like I said, I think this is the way I like it, and this is how it's displayed on my shelf right now. But mostly just because that dress is going to take up a lot of space on a shelf and really doesn't do anything visually or articulation-wise, so I don't really see a lot of point in having it. It's cool that it's there. Also, the Haros are here too, which is cool. You can paint the eyes. I don't paint them, they don't come with stickers, just, they're there. Cool. Woohoo. So overall, I'd say, honestly, if you're a Seed fan or a Lacus fan, but you don't want to do the hunting for some of the older prize figures and stuff like that, or even some of the smaller Gashapons that maybe don't look as good, or you don't want to shell out for some more expensive figures, this is good. It's passable. It does its job. It's a decent representation of Lacus, but it's not the best. It's reasonably easy to find. The price point's not too crazy. So if you want something that's gonna maybe throw something a little different in your building process, maybe kind of serve as a refresher to Gunpla, or just as a break to regular Gunpla, this isn't a bad option. It's quick build, the parts go together fairly well, and it's not very complex in terms of how the joints fit together. Some wonky parts here and there, sure, but overall it's pretty passable. It's not going to be something that blows your mind, but it's also not going to be a frustrating build either. So it's just a nice little fun kit to build if you like Seed or Lacus. However, if you don't like Seed, you're neutral, you hate Seed, this is probably not for you. I would say skip this, but for any of those Seed fans out there, or anyone who likes Lacus, this is something to get that is at least a placeholder if nothing else, but definitely stands in its own right as a Lacus Clyne. Now, of course, if you have any questions, pop them down in those comments below. I will do my best to answer them, and be sure to check out our other content here on the Gunpla Network. As always, friends, I've been the Spicer here for the Gunpla Network. Please stay safe and keep on building.